the economic condition in the city has been rough, and it's been dramatic since the recession, which has happened nationally. But the Center for Economic Development at UWM recently came out with a report regarding unemployment for black males in the city, and it's at 53%. How do you explain this happening during your tenure, on your watch, and to what extent are you going to take to dramatically bring that number down?
Well, I'm someone who grew up in Milwaukee, and so I can remember driving down Capitol Drive, west on Capitol Drive, and going past what was then A.O. Smith, and seeing row after row after row of car frames. And as a little kid, as a little boy, it was the ultimate. It was like a combination of between Tonka trucks and Lincoln logs. It was just really cool to see that, and it meant thousands of jobs. And I can remember when A.O. Smith sold the tower and the tower ultimately closed. There was a fellow who had worked there since 1964, and he had come here from Mississippi because his dad called him and said, "This is a great place to come and get a job." And in those days, you could work in a factory or a foundry or a brewery or a tannery, and if you didn't like your job, you could quit. And then you could go and start working the same day, second shift, because we had all these great blue-collar jobs here. And as recently as 1970, we had the highest per capita income for African Americans in any major city in this country, because we had those great blue-collar jobs. So what happened? And it didn't happen just in the last 8 years. It really has happened over the last 42 years. We've seen those jobs disappear. First, they start going to southern states. Then we started seeing them go to Mexico and to China. And it really has left this huge gap. Because in those days, what you needed to succeed in this community were two things. You needed a strong back and a good alarm clock. Because if you showed up for work and you worked hard, you could support your family. And tragically, a lot of those jobs have now gone overseas. Now, what's interesting is just yesterday I was at Masterlock, and I was talking about the insourcing that's occurring now. Because as a result of rising labor costs in China, the currency exchange rate, rising transportation costs, and the real estate prices in China, manufacturers are starting to reevaluate whether they want to have all of their production or a lot of their production in China. And I think this is a prime time, not just for Milwaukee. It's certainly an important time for Milwaukee, but it's a prime time for this country for both economic reasons and patriotic reasons to bring these jobs back. Let's start insourcing these jobs to Milwaukee, but to communities throughout this country, because the people who lost those jobs are the very people that you asked about, the African American men who have been out of work. And it is a very, very serious issue. And that's why I've been committed to trying to do what I can to connect people to jobs. Again, last Friday, I was at a graduation Milwaukee Gear, working with the Workforce Investment Board here in Milwaukee. And there were 15 men who went through a 10-week course and got training, and now will be able to be working at Milwaukee Gear. So we have these macro problems, but in a sense, the macro problems have a micro solution, because what it takes is the training for those men and women, and someone to give them a chance. And that's what's happening. And I want to continue to be engaged in that. I want to continue to help people find jobs where they can support their families, because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. We've got our families, and we want to be in a position to economically support our families. And so I'm committed to that, committed to working with employers to make that happen, and proud to have the opportunity to do it as a mayor of Milwaukee.
But I mean, 53%, that's twice as
it's
Depression era.
It's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. But again, I think businesses have a moral obligation too, because so often we hear the government doesn't create jobs, the businesses create jobs. Well, we need businesses to look at a big picture of what's going on, and obviously return for shareholders is at the top for them, but ultimately we cannot be a society that leaves so many people behind. And so I'm going to continue to do what I can to get jobs for people all along that economic ladder. And again, the challenge is most serious right now with those who don't have an education beyond high school, And that's why, again, the Job Corps Center is an example of what I've tried to do proactively to recognize that some people may not have finished their high school education, but realize sometime between 17 and 24 that they want to get more skills. And if you take a ride over to 60th and Green Tree, you'll see this brand new college campus. And it happened because I said, look, we have to have more training of young people so they can have the jobs. And a lot of them are people who, again, did not finish high school, and a lot of them are people of color. And I want them, just as I want everyone in this community, to be able to support their families.
My last question is that in 2009, you joined the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce in challenging the paid sick leave ballot initiative that was put forth by a number of organizations with the leadership of 9 to 5, a nonprofit for working women. That was now 3 years ago. Well, the vote was almost 4 years ago now. Do you regret taking a position against what 70% of Milwaukee citizens voted for?
I think it's important to do what you think is right. And as a member of Congress, I was proud to be one of the original sponsors of the Family Medical Leave Act. And so I think it is important for employers to treat their employees with dignity. The challenge is, at what level of government do you do this? And I can tell you numerous instances where I had employers say to me that they would simply have taken the jobs out of the city of Milwaukee because it applied only to the city of Milwaukee. And there was one executive who said, we're not going to make a big deal out of this, but we've got one call center in the city of Milwaukee. We've got another call center that's located outside the city of Milwaukee. We're just going to move those jobs. I had another business person who I called, and I called him because he had moved his company into the city of Milwaukee. And so I was, in essence, making the call as the ambassador of the city and saying, thank you for moving your company to the city, and thank you for working with our Department of City Development. I hope you had a positive experience. And he said, I had a very positive experience. But then he went on to say, if I had known about that, I would not have moved my company to the city. And just last week, I was at another company on the northwest side that had been owned by an out-of-state concern, and it is now owned by some local people. It's much smaller, much, much, much smaller. But I said, well, how'd you come about getting this business? And they said, I think it was 2009. I don't remember exactly when it was. They had some challenges at company, but when they felt that the sick leave law was going into place, they just decided to close down the company. So I have an obligation as a mayor to try to create jobs. And as well-meaning as that proposal was, and it was extremely well-meaning, I concluded that that could hurt the very people that it intended to help. So that the question, the public policy question is, if you're going to have that policy, do you do it at the local level? Do you do it at the state level? Do you do it at the federal level? And my belief is that it has to be done at the federal level so that you don't have communities that lose jobs, again, because it's a well-meaning proposal. But you could have the same impact where you put in a piece of legislation that people say, it's great, I love it, but the impact is that the jobs disappear. So who's better off at the end of the day if that happens? And that was a decision that I had to make.
I think that's a valid point to say that it's a federal level issue, but I mean, what do you do when the federal government falls short, specifically in this case with healthcare, but also with anything else? But I mean, what
I think that's a
what do you
valid
do
question.
when it falls short regarding healthcare? When
and I think that's a valid question, and I think you could ask the same question about healthcare, or you could ask the same question about pensions, for example. And if we were to have a local ordinance that required mandatory health coverage, or at the local level, a provision that said mandatory pensions, would the city be better off or worse off if the jobs left the city?
worse off. I mean,
Right. And so again, that's why I think these decisions have to be made at the federal level, some of these decisions. That's why I think the healthcare decisions, it made sense for those to be considered by Congress. I'm supportive of what the president did. I'm supportive of what Congress did. But you can't have a situation where, even though your intentions are the best in the world, you're actually hurting the people you want to help.